Outstanding. Pow!
FATENZO.com.
I believe that the freedom of speech is a universal international right, that all opinions shall be tolerated regardless if agreeable or disagreeable. I believe in the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, the freedom of expression, the freedom of religion, not from it, the freedom of the press, the right of the people to peaceably assemble, be it physically or spiritually or digitally or virtually. I believe in the separation of church and state and corporation. I believe that truth is non-binary and can be objective, subjective, normative, or complex. There are no eternal facts, as there are no absolute truths, except the word of God. For us creators and for our content, great thinkers have philosophized, and our founding fathers debated the dangers of cancellation and censorship for centuries. No individual shall be indemnified of criticism or mockery, for there is honesty in jest. I pledge that the ideas I share are my own and are not the expressed opinions of any violent criminal organizations. The only group I represent is the human race, and I reserve the right to interview any of my counterparts without fear, threat, or intimidation. Would their opinions be in their own? Would my opinions be in my own? For association does not always equal shared beliefs. I pledge to perform in a professional, dignified manner and not bully, harass, or slander my fellow human creatures, to refrain from hate, anger, sedition, vulgarity, harassment, pornography, cautioning that satire and sarcasm can at times be misinterpreted as such. I believe in the counter-speech doctrine, that the remedy to negative, harmful speech is more positive, helpful speech, not enforced silence. That no person shall be denied access to social media, which is the marketplace of ideas, and today's town square. That Section 230 privatizes communism and legalizes libel and stalking, and that content creators who have broken community guidelines in the past deserve retribution, because we're all constituents of the human party, and humans are fallible. Amen.
1, 2, 3.
All right, let's begin the show, baby. Thank you so much for joining me on episode 211 of the FATENZO show. FATENZO is Latin for podcast. This is Tuesday of the second week of Lent, March 7th, and the title of today's show is Practice What You Preach. We'll find out more about that from the gospel reading of today. We are joined by our guest co-host of the day, Kyle Seraphin, who's a former FBI member. He is a whistleblower. Recently he blew the whistle on a document out of the Richmond office of the FBI, who are apparently targeting traditional Catholics. That's the whole TLM movement. Not BLM, TLM. Anyway, so I got Kyle on, and this is going to be a very interesting conversation. All right, can't wait.
FATENZO.com, 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 FATENZO.com.
Outstanding. Pow!
Good day, do followers. This is your based Catholic liturgy program. It's the Holy Ghost's daily dose of digital divinity. And if you don't know, now you know the FATENZO show is Latin for podcast. Today we'll cover the good news from the book and the bad news of the world. And now, your host, a former altar boy who couldn't get molested in the basement of a rectory, Robert Vincent Piccirillo.
There's the Catholic bells, and that's the beginning of the podcast. What's up? I am joined by Kyle Seraphin. Kyle, how you doing, man? Thank you so much for being on my program. I really appreciate you taking the time.
I'm on my first cup of coffee still, so we're still booting up here.
Nice. Well, Kyle, I don't know if you've ever, seen the show or anything like that, or you probably don't know about it, but now you're going to know the FATENZO show is a based Catholic liturgy program, and I'm going to do we're going to do like a reading. We'll try to apply that to the world. Now, for those who don't know, Kyle Seraphin, he's been making his rounds through the media recently. I think this is a good way to start the show, is to talk about what you've recently done as far as exposing this document right here.
There it is.
There it is. There's the Appendix D. Southern Poverty Law Center defined RTC hate groups in the United States. Can you believe that the Southern Poverty Law Center is defining anything? So basically, the FBI used Southern Poverty Law Center as a citation in order to create this, I guess, an internal memo where get everybody on board to start looking into traditional Latin masses and those places apparently being havens for extremists. Is that correct?
That's more and less correct. So the less part is that it's not really a memo. It's actually what's called an intelligence product, which is written by intelligence analysts. They put out these documents. It's their job. They basically write term papers. They sit inside at their desk and do research and analysis, and they take intelligence and they formalize it into this sort of, document. So it's full of citations like you'd see in a term paper. It's full of, references and things like that. And then it makes these analytical type predictions. And so in this particular case, this was a new analyst, from what I understand, who wrote this thing straight out of a Catholic university, if you can take that for what it's worth. But anyway, wrote this sucker up and put it out. It was supposed to be approved, or it is approved, in fact, by a senior intelligence analyst. That's the supervisory level guy. And then it goes to the division council. The division council is supposed to look at it and decide whether or not it's a legal, whether it's under FBI policies, whether it comports with all the different types of things it has to do, and then releases it to the intelligence community at large. In this case, an unclassified document, and it makes certain suggestions based on the analysis, which, as far as we can tell, were not carried out. But I wouldn't swear to it, just because I don't believe the FBI. I don't believe what they'd say. And then it took them quite a while to get it actually taken down. So they pledged, once they went forward, that it was atrocious. I actually talked to some FBI employees in the last 2 days, and they mentioned that they got phone calls, that there was some internal discussion trying to figure out, like, how do we fix this? Because the press is really bad. Not what we did was really bad, mind you. And I think that's what's really important to note. This looks really bad, so how do we figure it out? And there were people that just basically said, you have to own it. Like, it was written, it was approved, it got through all the safeguards, the checks, the balances. And, this is something that is now exposed, and now it's another black eye for the FBI. That's probably the 9th thing that I've done in the whistleblower sphere. So this is just my most recent activity that people have seen. But if people have been not tracking what I've been doing, this goes all the way back to the email that was sent out by the Assistant Director of Counterterrorism in October of 2021, where he basically announced that the FBI was going to be investigating parents at school board meetings who spoke out on behalf of the National Association of School Boards and in conjunction with the Attorney General. So that's kind of where I started putting things out in the public sphere. In that case, I went directly to Congress, and then I've gotten less and less interested in what Congress does and more interested in just sharing it with the American people and letting them make their own decisions, because we haven't seen a lot of action out of Congress.
Mr. Seraphin, can you explain to me what, about being a whistleblower? Whistleblower is, and please pardon my use of this word, I don't mean you are that at all, but it's like a rat, but it's for good, right? It's like, yes, you're blowing the whistle and you're trying to tell people that that there's some bad stuff going on over here. You're trying to do it correct, for the intentions of helping the public. It's all out of good. Correct?
There's a legal... Yep, and it actually falls under 5 U.S.C. 2302. That's for most people in the federal government, but it specifically exempts members of the intelligence community, to include the FBI. And so they rewrote in 2016, they passed another law, 5 U.S.C. 2303. And those protections and determinations, it's a legal definition that says that a whistleblower is going to be someone who exposes in good faith. They don't have to be proven correct. They just have to not be proven to have lied about it, right? So a good faith allegation of a violation of rule, policy, or federal law. I think it's not actually policy. There's a slightly different word. But essentially, government operations as codified by their own agency, in this case, the FBI. And then the second thing could be like a gross misuse of government resources, what are known as fraud, waste, and abuse statutes. And so this would be if you were using, let's say, Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, is using the government jet for personal use, and not using it appropriately, and spends $1.5 million getting the plane to come to him because he doesn't like to sit in traffic, which is one of the allegations we've made to Congress. That would also be considered under that second statute, the second part of the statute.
So you're like you're almost like a Serpico.
Right. Yeah, I suppose so. It's calling out the things that it's not supposed to be doing because, in the way that the guys that I've been working with have said, there's an oath. The oath is not to the FBI. It's not to the government agency that you signed up to work with. The oath is to the American people, but more specifically to the Constitution and to maintaining the Constitution as our ruling document. So if it's going to keep track of us, then we have to play within the bounds of it. And one of the bounds is Congress writes laws. We have to follow the laws. If we're not, we have to be held accountable. So
when you got into the FBI, I'm sure that you wanted to do right, and you wanted to, do something that was going to be for the good of people. When did you start realizing that, FBI agents are fallible humans just like all of us, and there's a lot of craziness that goes on within?
Almost immediately, I guess. I showed up to Quantico in 2016 in the summer of 2016 in June. And so I had a background in the Air Force. I had a background going through special operations. I'm a combat diver. I've jumped out of planes. I've became an air traffic controller and a bunch of other these sort of like complicated skills to be able to move some of the Air Force assets around in a three-dimensional battle space. That was kind of the goal that I had. And I'd been through survival training. I'd been through the sort of the POW experience that they do and all these other kind of things. And most of it was just like running with a really heavy pack or running really fast with no pack on, swimming a long ways with stuff on in your clothes. So I go through that and I show up at Quantico, and Quantico is a totally different animal. Like when I showed up at a new school or unit, I've had people jump in my face and scream at me. I had people drop me on the floor and, you knock out a bunch of push-ups or flutter kicks or whatever it is when you're in your dress blues, you got a tie on, you're in your class A's as they call them in the Army. And then suddenly I get to Quantico, and like there's this like chubby lady who works for the government who like hands me a folder and tells me you can go have lunch and we'll see you in a couple hours. And everything is gentle, everything is soft. It's the opposite of what I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be a very militant sort of paramilitary experience, and it's nowhere near that. I got 9 hours of sleep every night. The classwork was easy. I never studied for it, and people would turn around and go, don't you think that you could get kicked out? And I'd go, no. And they go, why not? And I said, because I can do basic math. And the math is they drop like 5% of the course, of the students in the course. And I just have to be smarter than the guy on my left and my right. And that's true in every room I've been in so far. So I'm good. And obviously that was the case as I got out of there. I didn't spend extra time studying or anything like that. So I've heard people say it was very rigorous. That wasn't the case. I got to Washington Field Office and was assigned to counterintelligence. And counterintelligence is almost exclusively a violation of American rights. There's some moderate versions of it where we're going after espionage. These are people that break the law, but the vast majority of counterintelligence, or what we call CI, everything's abbreviated. The vast majority of CI cases are for information purposes, which is to say, we'd say, well, Robert made a phone call to the Italian embassy, and there's a spy at the Italian embassy that we want to watch, and so maybe he's dealing with that person. Let's just start looking into him to see if he's talking to said spy. It wouldn't be the Italian embassy, but there'd be, you get my certain threat countries that we've had cases into people who literally made a phone call to the consulate in New York, to one of the 5 or 6 major threat countries. No other information, and they've had cases on the guy for years. And for all he was ordering a pizza and got the wrong number. So, you know what I mean? And because the call was 2 minutes. So
yeah,
that's
it's basically it's a bureaucracy. There's it's surprisingly a lot, it's just like anything else that we do. Just like anything else, they drum it up on in the movies. You think it's something else, but then it's totally, you can deal with it when you get into it. And you realize that there's a lot of assumptions going on as far as where are you picking up your leads from. You're basically just, doing what you want. Like, kind of like you guys are you're not really following laws or anything like that, right? Or the procedures are very lax where you're allowed to just basically spy on people.
There's a lot of leeway to be able to do that. In fact, there's a single paragraph in what's called the dialogue. So the dialogue does govern what criminal. So here's the difference. And this is why people should understand a major differential when they look at the FBI. That the FBI has basically two sides of its coin. There's a more dominant side, that's the intelligence side, and that's what's so dangerous. And the people that I've been dealing with, the whistleblowers that have been coming forward, are seeing that and are concerned by the skill set that and the technologies and the techniques that the FBI is able to use. So the intelligence circle, the intelligence cycle, it goes around and around. You drop something in, it never ends. All right, and it doesn't aim towards a finite end. And unlike criminal investigations, which actually end in prosecution or declination, sometimes an attorney says, "We're not going to prosecute. We're done with you." And so you just go like, "I got this case. I've got all this evidence. I did all these witness interviews. Would you like to prosecute?" And the United States Attorney's Office goes, "No, not interested." And then you've got a declination, so you just type it up, U.S. Attorney declined to prosecute, and then you close the case. That's the end of it. Does that make sense? And then you got to return everything.
Yeah. So these cases just kind of keep going.
Yeah, the intelligence side never has to end because the goal is not prosecution. There's not a linear end to it. So why would it end? Its goal is actually to maintain itself. And it keeps checking the file, what we call like a file review. You have to do those every 90 days to make sure that you've got cases and work and so on. So every 90 days, you could do a file review and you got to do something on your case. It's like, well, I did a subpoena, or I did a witness interview, or I went out and did surveillance or something. So you do all these different little things and you just move it every 90 days down the line until you've like, there's been intelligence cases that have been open for 23 years.
Just with the hopes of finding something against the person or whatever.
The most egregious thing that I saw, one of the most egregious things that I saw was there was a counterterrorism case. And intelligence cases take two kind of forks. They can either go down the counterintelligence, that's like, spies and traitors and that kind of thing, or people who are working with foreign governments. And then the other one is the counterterrorism, and that has more recently become more domestic, but it used to be all foreign terrorists. But they had a counterterrorism case in Washington, in the Washington area, Northern Virginia. The guy had been investigated for 23 years, counterterrorism investigation. So that was the predication, that was the opening. And then they arrested him for child pornography 23 years later. But they've been looking at this guy for 2.5 decades. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want people involved in child pornography and I want them caught. And yet, I don't want people having a case open them for 23 years looking for the thing they did wrong. And then the question is always kind of like, well, did he just get into child porn? The guy was in his 60s or late 60s maybe. So is that something that's always been there and we just found out about it? Like, how do we come about that? And when they did the arrest of it, it's very strange to be involved in that sort of situation where, it took that long to generate criminal material. Why? Why were we looking at him for so long? And why was it not related? Why was the criminal material not related to the thing that he was being looked at for, right? That's a real dangerous thing. If you look at somebody long enough, you're going to find a federal crime. That just it works. So
hey, this all stems from Alphonse Capone and tax evasion, right?
Yes, they have the Bill said Bill get him long enough, right? They did find something to get old Al Capone.
That's right. Now, Mr. Seraphin, you were on Tucker Carlson. I really want to play that clip. Let me play that segment of you on Tucker, and so we can break down this most recent whistleblow of the FBI going against we're targeting traditional Latin Mass attendees.
FATENZO.com.
So in this weird inverted world that we're living in, the criminals are actually the victims. So who are the criminals? Well, obviously, sincere Christians. They're the real problems. Sincere Christians in the middle class, boy, they're dangerous. And the FBI, it's hard to believe this, doubtless there are decent FBI agents, but the FBI as an organization has joined in the hunt for Christians, and we have proof of it. The FBI tried to manufacture crimes against sincere Catholics. The FBI's Richmond field office recently published an internal document promising to punish, quote, radical traditionalist Catholics and their ideology. Now, just to make something completely clear, the Bill of Rights prohibits the government from weighing in on sectarian or religious questions. They don't get to decide whether your religion is good or bad. They have to be agnostic on it. But the FBI has decided if you're too sincere about Catholicism, you're a criminal. The document cites obvious lies from the fascist and dishonest Southern Poverty Law Center several times. Now, we only have this memo because a recently suspended FBI agent called Kyle Seraphin brought it to the public, and we're grateful that he did. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's hard to believe this is even real. This is one of those. What was your reaction when you saw this?
Well, my reaction is predictable. I mean, I'm a Catholic, number one, and I think it's appalling. It's one of those things that when the government has gotten to the point where you talked about our Second Amendment rights, and those defend our First Amendment rights to practice our religion, particularly the way that we want to. I'm friends with people who love the Latin Mass. I grew up in a traditional school where I actually learned Latin in 5th and 6th grade and all the way through high school. And it doesn't seem reasonable, but it is the state of the FBI at this point that they are so desperate to find white supremacists that they're going to look at the Catholic Church. But I think if we're realistic about it, what they're doing is they have found a gateway in what they think is fringe Catholicism in order to move into Christians in general and declare them to be the actual the criminals in this country or the potential terrorists. And that's what I think we're seeing, because the whole document basically is written from the perspective of somebody who thinks that there are significant abortion rights that need to be defended, and also an LGBTQ agenda that has to be pushed down the American people's throats. And those are antithetical to Catholicism. So it's pretty easy. It's an open door into Christians in this country, which is pretty much all the country.
Well, yeah, and also Orthodox Judaism and Islam and Mormonism. I mean, they're right. And did no one in the FBI say, whoa, wait a second. It's not our job to decide which is a better religion and criminalize people's religious belief. Did anyone in your world within the Bureau say that?
Well, obviously, the whistleblower who brought it to me. So I'm in contact with a number of people who work in the FBI and have the same values that probably you and I do. And so, they brought it to me. One of them brought it to me and said, this is a problem. And this person is not a Catholic. But he or she stated the very simple statement, which is that if they're going to go after radical traditional Catholics, then radical traditional Baptists are next, and radical traditional evangelicals, and anybody else that espouses essentially what is radical, which is just a Christian faith. And that is dangerous, apparently, in this country.
I'm not Catholic either. I'd be defending the Scientologists or anybody else. Like, you can't do this.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you bringing this to the public. Kyle Seraphin, thank you.
Outstanding. Pow!
Wow, Mr. Seraphin, I'm a Catholic. I went to Catholic school my entire life. I appreciate both forms of the Mass. I'm actually going to be a deacon. I'm getting into the deacon program here for the Novus Ordo, and I attend Mass daily. Let's put it this way. I just recently got back from the New York City area. I was up there for probably about 8 or 9 days. And in that time span, I went to 4 traditional Latin masses and 3 Novus Ordo masses. And so 2 of the TLM masses were the high mass, and then 2 were the low mass. I love traditional Latin expression of the Mass. I think it's awesome. There's a really great one here in Norwalk, Connecticut. I went to this Catholic church, founded 1848. It just celebrated its 175th year anniversary. It was tremendous. I have I think I got a clip of
FATENZO.com.
I could just keep listening to that all day. It just brings me so much peace. I mean, you mentioned the Italian embassy earlier. I picture myself in The Godfather praying every time I'm in a TLM mass, and I'm going to go do a mafia hit right afterwards. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's it's awesome.
So there's a lot of evil in this world, and I think that anybody who's paying attention can see that. And if you're thinking about some of the things that are perpetrating evil right now, a lot of it's coming out of Hollywood. A lot of it is sort of this secular culture that comes out, and they're using devil imagery. They're using a lot of satanic imagery to try to just normalize it. I think we saw that in the Grammys and some other kind of pop. But if you think about what is the fight that goes against that? And what is the thing that that always resists like the physical power of evil and the devil in this world? It's every time, like Hollywood even knows it. Think about every single time you've ever seen something where someone is resisting, demons and satanic influence on earth. It's Latin Mass. It's the most traditional symbols that you can find in the Catholic Church, right? It goes back to The Exorcist when it comes on film, but like that's been going on for 2,000 years for a reason. Like there's a reason why that is there. And even people in Hollywood who tend to be very, very secular and tend to be mostly interested in, a physical existence, a hedonistic existence, they know it too. They can't help but know it. And, I used to go to a church where they did the Gregorian chant. There would be 2 rows of monks on either side of the altar. And it puts you in a place that is an experience of divine. Like that's why all the cathedrals in Europe exist. It's not because they said, well, let's build up, a really appropriate and well-insulated building that feels very comfortable to be in. They're like, let's put something that makes you realize that you are not only for this world. And if you've ever, and I don't know if you've ever been to Europe and seen any of the cathedrals, but they change the human like brain chemistry when you walk through it. You can't help but do that. Every single person goes there and they are in awe of something that took hundreds of years to build. And many lives, were spent literally doing nothing else. That was their work on earth, was just continuing this thing because they didn't even see the completion of it. And it's a testament to human beings' faith that eventually this building will have a roof and eventually people will be inside of it and they will be celebrating Mass.
Oh yeah, I feel like I'm going to levitate every time I'm going to the traditional Latin Mass. Like I need a seatbelt or something like that, or I'm going to go up and fly into that roof. I mean, from the literal bells and figurative whistles or whistleblowers. I mean, when you're in a Mass and you're in a really awesome church that is so aesthetically beautiful that it is there just to make you in the mood to pray. And everything there, from the incense, from the Gregorian chants like you're talking about, all of that, the Latin, because a lot of Catholics, traditional Catholics will say like Satan hates Latin. He uses Latin. He talks in Latin. Look at Elon Musk. He's quoting Latin, Vox Populi, right? People are starting to realize more about the Latin. The Latin's beautiful. I love it so much. And actually, I started learning some of the Latin in my regular Novus Ordo church that has a lot of Latin that still keeps some of those elements. But it's terrible. They're closing up the TLM. Look at this traditional. After 10 years, the traditional Latin Mass will no longer be allowed to be celebrated at Holy Name of Jesus Church in Windsor Terrace, Brooklyn. The final Mass celebrated by Father Leo Camerati, OP, was solemn and well attended. That was this past weekend. The last Latin Mass. They're shutting it down all over the Northeast. That's why at St. Mary's, that church I attend, the priest just had a conversation with the bishop the week before. He was talking about it's kind of, we don't know what's going to happen. Then this past Sunday, I talked to the bishop and we're all good right now here at this church. So it's going to continue there, I guess, in the Diocese of Bridgeport, but it's getting shut down all over the place, right?
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Makes one wonder what the, what is inspiring that need to shut it down, because it's a preference. It's a choice. It's been around. It was good enough for, somebody sent me a meme because I've been sort of circulating in some Catholic circles now because of this document. And that's not to say that I'm the most traditional Catholic there is, nor is it to say that I'm the best Catholic, because I think I'm as fallen as anybody else, and probably more so in some ways. I do my best, and I try to be better every year. I just had a discussion about this with my brother, but somebody sent me a meme and it showed the men that were celebrating Mass on a military base the day before D-Day, right? Before the invasion that happened in World War II to take back Europe. And that was the Mass that they celebrated, because there was no Vatican II at that point. This is pre-Vatican II. So the men that stormed the beaches at Normandy, a lot of them were Catholic, and a lot of them had celebrated a Latin Mass the day before, the night before. And then they got into those landing crafts and they went and they took back Europe, and they walked into machine gun fire knowing that many of them would not live, or having no idea what they were walking into the unknown like that. And in any case, people sent me that. And I've always when you see people that do great deeds, human great deeds, it's always interesting to me to think about what was the story that brought them to that moment, because the men, and many of them were very young men, 17, 18, 19 years old, who were walking into those machine gun nests, who stepped onto that beach. It wasn't black and white the way that we see it, right? It wasn't black and white. That's just what we see. That was the full color existence that they had, an olive drab and wearing those things. And, in this image you're showing here on a Red Cross van with a white, with a big white placard on it, and a man in full color dress who was up there celebrating the mass in front of them. And then they rolled into probably what had to feel like hell on earth. Just, the sky full of, bullets ripping through from German machine guns and ordnance exploding left and right and all that. Anyway, I just always think about the things that give people the strength to go and do that thing, which is incredible. It really is incredible.
Well, you said it before. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you said it before about Hollywood. Hollywood knows that the Latin Mass is powerful. But somebody in Hollywood's been trying to tell us something the whole time, I think. Mr. Mel Gibson.
There he is. Who, a flawed human being on every level, like all of us, right? But not so many things.
Let's do the reading of the day. Can I help? Would you please do one of the readings? I sent, I don't know if you got them. I emailed you them, reading number 1 and also the gospel. And you could pick whichever one you want. You could read the first one if you want, or you could read the second.
There it is. Yeah, give me a second. Let me pull it up.
No problem.
All right. Well, I can read. So you tell me which one.
Go ahead and do reading number 1, okay?
Okay.
Prophet Isaiah.
I've got it now in front of me. So the readings from the book of the prophet Isaiah. Hear the word of the Lord, princes of Sodom. Listen to the instruction of our God, people of Gomorrah. Wash yourselves clean. Put away your misdeeds from before my eyes. Cease doing evil. Learn to do good. Make justice your aim. Redress the wronged. Hear the orphan's plea. Defend the widow. Come now, let us set things right, says the Lord. Though your sins be like scarlet, they may be white as snow. Though they may be crimson red, they may become white as wool. If you are willing and obey, you shall eat the good things of the land. But if you refuse and resist, the sword shall consume you. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Psalm 50. And the response is, to the upright, I will show the saving power of God. To the upright, I will show the saving power of God. Not for your sacrifices do I rebuke you, for your burnt offerings are before me always. I take from your house no bullock, no goats out of your fold. To the upright, I will show the saving power of God. Why do you recite my statutes and profess my covenant with your mouth? Though you hate discipline and cast my words behind you, to the upright I will show the saving power of God. When you do these things, shall I be deaf to it? Or do you think that I am like yourself? I will correct you by drawing them up before your eyes. He that offers praise as a sacrifice glorifies me, and to him that goes the right way I will show the salvation of God. To the upright I will show the saving power of God. Cast away from you all the crimes you have committed, says the Lord, and make yourselves a new heart and a new spirit. And let's do the gospel reading of the day. Gospel reading is from the gospel according to Matthew. Glory be to you, O Lord. Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees have taken their seat on the chair of Moses. Therefore, do and observe all things whatsoever they tell you. But do not follow their example, for they preach, but they do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens hard to carry and lay them on people's shoulders, but they will not lift a finger to move them. All their works are performed to be seen. They widen their phylacteries and lengthen their tassels. They love places of honor at banquets, seats of honor in synagogues, greetings in marketplaces, and the salutation, Rabbi. As for you, do not be called Rabbi. You have but one teacher, and you are all brothers. Call no one on earth your father. You have but one Father in heaven. Do not be called Master. You have but one Master, the Christ. The greatest among you must be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, but whoever humbles himself will be exalted. The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Praise you, Lord Jesus Christ. All right, so before we just start breaking this down a little bit, I just want to let everybody know that I'm not an ordained priest. I'm not I'm not a prophet. I'm definitely not a saint. I'm just a scum, I guess, a sinner, a person like everybody else. But I have done my research by going to mass quite frequently. I go basically daily. I'm the host who eats the host. Anyway, so Kyle, so this is talking about practicing what you preach. Hence the title of the show, right?
It said phylacteries, which I want to tell people what that is because I looked it up while you were reading.
Thank you.
Do you know what
something that's long in length?
Yeah, to widen a phylactery is to have a larger. It's a little leather box that is containing Hebrew text for prayer, worn by men at Jewish prayer in the mornings, and it's a reminder to keep the law. So it's a show. If you were to make it larger, it's to let people know this is how important keeping the Jewish law is to me. So,
I mean, this is kind of like what a lot of people do at the FBI is kind of like what police officers do sometimes, not to just go after law, people that are supposed to enforce the law. A lot of times they themselves are breaking the law, right? On the down low.
I would say it's more analogous to people who show up to places where it's inappropriate in a uniform, that put on an FBI raid jacket, that you don't want to wear that out in public, or wear a hat that says FBI or shows their badge and tucks it in and wears it in a pin on their suit or whatever the thing is that they're looking for. They're looking for the credibility of the office, but not necessarily demonstrating it. And in this case, that's the practice what you preach piece of it, right? It's people that want to have the position of honor, that want to be seen, but they don't want to do the work, which oftentimes is gritty and it's not all that fun. It's not enjoyable. So people in the military do the same thing. You'll see people that wear their uniform out to a Walmart. It's like, get that thing off. It's for work. There's a reason why you have pajamas that you wear to work. It's so that the enemy can't see you. And when you're done training for the day, or you're done doing your service for the day, go back and put on your blue jeans like everybody else, unless you want people to come up and thank you for your service, even though you're administrative troops and your job is just doing finance, like people do finance every day, all over the world, all over the country here, doing payroll. You're not getting shot at today. So maybe take off the uniform. I used to find that really gross when I served. I'd see people that were freshly pressed uniform. It's camouflage, so it's a utility uniform. That's the goal of it, is to actually go do the outdoor work. And they would be wearing it while shopping or out at dinner or something like that. I know the duty day's over. It's after 5. What are you doing? There's a lot of people looking for the accolades for the thing they do. And the whole purpose of the gospel in this case is to go and not exalt yourself. That's exalting yourself, but to be humble. And there's a big problem in many professions, but particularly in our political class and particularly in our law enforcement and our military, when people are looking for recognition and not serving humbly, because there are a ton of very quiet professionals doing the job humbly. And those are the people that we want doing it. Those are the people who should have the job. And yet, many times, it also appeals to people who have the exact opposite instinct. And that's where we get into problems, because that's pride, which is one of the roots of all sins, right?
Absolutely. One of the 7 deadly sins. And no, but people even have fake valor, where they'll just make up their credentials too, right?
They will. That's true. That's definitely a thing that happens. And it's disappointing because, I ran across a Navy SEAL who was became a friend of mine when I was in Kansas. I was 20, maybe 25 years old, and no military service yet. I enlisted when I was 27, and Walt was one of the reasons that I did that. And I remember meeting him, and I looked at him, and he just was, he was stout. He was just jacked. He was 5'8" or 5'9", and looked like he weighed about 225. And he worked with his hands. He ran a construction company. He was a contractor. But the way that he spoke and the way that he moved, it was my first kind of instinct of people, my first kind of experience with people who were in the special operations community. And he said something, I don't remember what it was. I ordered up a bipod for a deer rifle or something like that. And I said, I got a new toy in. And he goes, well, what'd you get? And I said, well, I got this Harris bipod. I'm going to put it on my 300 Win Mag. And he goes, oh, well, that's just another, I don't know what he said exactly, but it was like, that's another implement for your tool, or that's just another, accessory for your system or something like that. Like, he said something very specific that was, I kind of went like, huh. And that's a person who's been around the profession of arms. And he didn't, and I said, what did you do before this? And he said, I served in the military. And I said, what branch did you serve in? And he said, I served in the United States Navy. So I had to draw it out of this guy. It wasn't like he was like, I'm a Navy SEAL, like he wasn't that guy. And so many people were not that guy for many, many years. And the ones that are the really dangerous, the people that are really defending freedom in a way that is, they've gone down and they've done things that are really difficult. They don't lead with that. You ask people that are special forces, and I have a number of friends who are Green Berets like that. And you ask them, what do you do? It's like, well, I work for the United States Army. It's like, sure you do. But like, why do you look like the way you do? Why do you look like you could eat a tank? Like, how did that happen? And then they'll go, well, I serve in a Ford whatever unit. And you go like, like, were you out of Fort Bragg at some point? And they go, yeah. And I go, are you an ODA guy? And if you know what you're talking about, you can get them to say the thing. But most of them, their motto was always quiet oppressors. I mean, it's quiet oppressors. I just mixed their two mottos. It's the quiet professionals is what they always kind of like. That was what they aspired to do. And their motto, once again, Latin, is De Liber Oppressor. Is that right?
Ooh, that's awesome.
Hold on, let me pull up the motto because I don't want to misquote it. But
they have a lot of Latin in all the different branches. Semper Fi, right? In the Marines.
Also.
And you're absolutely right. And that's one of the things that Christianity teaches, though. Catholicism in general also would teach humility and be more humble. And
yeah, humility. It's a big problem in a lot of the things we're seeing today. Like, I think so many people lack humility. It's a good reminder. I'm humble not by choice even at this point, because just my circumstances have, when someone takes your paycheck and you sell your house to be able to continue doing the thing. That's my backstory, is that prior to being public, my wife and I sold our house because we knew that we weren't going to have an income. So, my whole family, I've got 3 kids, we're stuffed into 2 10 by 12 bedrooms in my folks' house with no home of our own at the moment. And I lived in a palace. I really did. I lived in this beautiful brand new home that was built out in the desert of New Mexico, and I had mountain views, and I'd watch the sunset and color the hills every night. And I'd watch the sun come up over them and throw the first rays over the top of the mountains. And it was stunning. I mean, it was beautiful. It was an idyllic place to have little kids. And we sold that. And now we're in the opposite of that, where, it's not that my parents' house is not nice. It's that I'm 41 years old and I'm a husband and I have no job, like, living with my folks, so that we can continue doing the thing that we're doing, talking to people like you, exposing things, showing up on Tucker Carlson, kind of, exposing all of the malfeasance that our federal government is involved in. But that's humbling, because as I told someone the other day, I'm the best dressed and cleanest cut homeless guy that shows up on Fox News all the time, because I've been on Dan Bongino's show, who's a friend of mine. I've been on Tucker Carlson's. I was on Jesse Waters the other day. I'll be on Jesse Waters again soon, I think. I show up on all these different national shows talking about things that are wrong, and at the same time, when I leave that studio and I drive back to my abode, it's not my home, and I have to clean up the room the way that my mom tells me to do it, because it upsets her, because she's got all these neurotic tics, and she's been living on her own for the last 20 years when I was raising a family. So that's a weird thing to do, and it's inherently humbling to do something like that. You have no other choice but to look around and remember that humility. We could all be reminded of humility, I think, at some point.
Did you double check that Latin?
I did, yeah. It's de oppresso liber, which is to say to free from oppression. It's the motto of the Special Forces. I actually have it in my head. I just don't know why I twisted it. I know the verb comes at the end. It's been a long time since I've done a lot of Latin, but the essential point that people join Special Forces to do is to do unconventional warfare in places where the United States would otherwise not go. And that's why these guys are so humble. Most of them you'd never know it about them, other than the way that they carry themselves is a very specific it's a very specific way of entering a room. It's a very specific way of looking at a room. And, my last partner when I was in the FBI was a Green Beret. I performed this is back in my more heathen days. I got ordained in this sort of like Unitarian church just to be able to do like legal weddings. So I would go out there and perform weddings for guys that, they wanted to do it someplace. They were not Christian per se. Some of them were, in fact, but we would just go and do a legal wedding ceremony. And so I've done some of those. And one of them was for a buddy who was a special forces guy that wanted to get married. And it was he was a Christian guy. I think his wife was Jewish. They didn't have a spirituality that they shared. I would be surprised if that wasn't the case now. But at the time that they got married, we went and did that. And it's like, when you get to know people in that community, and I like the number of, legal weddings that I've sort of, witnessed and been part of, a lot of them were guys in special operations. Probably 4 or 5 guys who didn't, have an easy choice to go do something. They didn't have the time frame to go and set something up, and they may have gotten their marriage blessed in a church sometime later. But we went and signed the legal documents that is required in this country to be able to do such a thing. And those are people that are super close friends of mine.
Wow, you're talking. There's so much to unpack here. I mean, I really respect the humility of being able to share your story and having to. I'm 42 years old. I've been through some very similar circumstances as you have, though. I had to go back with the family for different reasons. And I don't need to go into that, but it is quite humbling to do that and to be honest about going through that. I know that you're going to make it on the other side, definitely through this. But I had another point about what you were saying just now.
It's not go out and have a discussion with people about, and at the same time, I think it'd be disingenuous, and I think it would be a false representation of what's happening. Part of it is it shows the story for people who are not, people always want to know, why are more people not speaking out that work within the federal government, whether it be the Department of Justice or other departments? Why do they not come forward and say this is what's going wrong? And I'm living that example in some ways. The reason they don't go forward and do that is because the consequences are pretty catastrophic for most people. I know a lot of people would not be able to survive this. My wife has been, staying basically with her in-laws for 5.5, almost 6 months at this point. And that's a difficult thing for anybody to do.
So
under
I'm sorry for cutting you off, but when you were thinking about, coming out and talking about stuff before the first time you did this, you blew the whistle. Did you have discussions with people that were close to you, and did they tell you, hey, don't rock the boat, that's really stupid, don't do that, just focus on your job, focus on your career, you have a family, that kind of thing? Did you confide in anybody about this before you did it?
The people Brain Trust is a group of like-minded individuals. They're not, I'm trying to think if one of the probably 4 or 5 guys that I confide in regularly are not. One of them is Catholic. The rest of them are Christian, but they're pretty devout in their own faith. And there's a lot of scripture that's bandied about. There's a lot of proverbs and psalms that are shared for the appropriate moment for what we're going through. And when this all started coming down, I there was no second thought. So I received an email that said that the FBI was going to be taking a look at parents at school boards. I follow the news. This is the real key. So many people that I've met in the Bureau have no clue. They have no concept of what's happening in the world that they are actually a part of. They don't understand what the agency is doing as a whole. So they're not able to put 2 and 2 together. I heard the Attorney General of the United States, theoretically the boss of everybody that works in the DOJ, the Department of Justice, and the FBI is under that, right? So when Merrick Garland goes out in front of Congress and says a thing under oath, and then a few days later we get an email saying the opposite of that thing, then that would normally be known as either perjury or a complete failure on his part to be able to control the entity that he's responsible for. So I got that. It was like I made an appointment with my congresswoman's office the same day. It was immediate. I didn't think about it. And I think that's a lot of the things that comes from some of the training that I went through, that if you're going to sit and deliberate, and as my wife likes to use, I don't know if this is a real good word or not, but she always says perseverate, which is just to turn it over in your head over and over again to the point where you're not able to do any action over it. I can't do those things. I don't have that instinct. I do versus wondering. That's not to say I don't aim the shot. I went to the right people. I knew what the rule that covered the actions that I was involved in. The actual ability to go and petition somebody of Congress is under 5 USC 7211. So there's a federal statute that allows me to go do the thing that I did outside of my chain of command. But you've got to go do things. If you sit and wonder about them forever, many times that leads to inaction. A lot of people don't realize this, but there's really 3 sympathetic responses when you encounter like a challenge or a fear. And people are familiar with fight and flight, right? Like those are the 2. But the third is freeze. And many animals and many people will freeze instead of fight or flee. Like both fight and flight are both actions, right? They both are taking action. The inaction is a thing that we really have to fight against, I think, a lot of times. So for me, that's the thing that I don't do that. I'm a fight guy. And when you bring me something that's legal, or you bring me evidence that someone may have committed a crime, like lying in front of Congress, which was the actual allegation, the FBI is actually allowed to investigate parents at school boards. That's allowed. What's not allowed is for the attorney general to get up and lie about it, if that's the plan. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, and it's very interesting that you were talking about that, about the decision process. I really love the quote by Teddy Roosevelt. In any moment of decision, the best thing to do is the right thing. The second best thing to do is the wrong thing, and the worst thing to do is nothing at all. And also, it made me also think about, the TLM priest from not last Sunday, the Sunday before that. He was talking about there's 3 levels of a sin, right? The anatomy of a sin. So the first thing is when you're being tempted, you're not doing anything wrong at that point. You're just being tempted. But the second thing is called delectation. It sounded almost like that, what you were talking about with the FBI, where you are doing the counterintelligence and you decide, I forgot that word that you used. It was a D word also. But delectation is the second step in the 3-step sin process, where you start delighting in it and you're thinking about it. Oh, wouldn't that be great if I did this? And then third is actually doing the sin. Anyway, I know but that's like made me think of that when you were talking about that word that your wife uses all the time. So it's when you're in that process of thinking about whatever it is, that moment of decision, and you can kind of just get wrapped up with that, and then you not do anything. It's sometimes better to shoot first and aim later.
I think that do them simultaneously. Like, so, the people, when you train to a certain level, and we'll go into to firearms just for a second, because I think it's an interesting analogy. You don't want to aim after you shoot. That's how you miss. But what you want to have is enough skill and enough time and training and enough experience that as you aim, you are moving forward in the action of taking the shot. So if you look at the guys that are the best at speed handgun, the guys that are the best at shooting a rifle, and this is a skill that I've trained in. As you line up your shot, you're already moving the mechanism to pull the trigger. The safety is coming off as the weapon is shouldered. Your finger is addressing the trigger because you are now on target, or at least the gross management of it. And then as the fine, last little aiming happens, because you can't fire without aiming, you're actually pressing the trigger backwards so that the shot breaks as you come into alignment. And that's the fastest way you can do it, is that they're happening simultaneous to each other, because there are things that has to happen. So if you are like, I know this is wrong, I'm going to take action, you are deciding that action as you are taking the action, to the point where that by the time that you actually execute whatever the action is, you are on target. Otherwise, you're sending rounds down range that you're accountable for, and you might miss. You don't want to be doing that. So I do think that there's something to be said, but part of that is training your mind to recognize good and bad, to develop your moral compass. I had this long conversation with somebody about raising children the other day, and I said the most important reason for me why we came back to the church, because like so many people, I went away from it and I came back to it, and it was something that I wasn't sure how it fit into my life. I wasn't sure what I thought about all of it. So, prodigal son type mentality. And yet the most important thing for me is that I have responsibilities, because I have 3 children in this world, and I need to give them the same chances I had to know what was right, what was wrong, and to give them a moral compass that was well calibrated. They may choose at some point, like many of us do, I think, to walk away and say, I don't want anything to do with that. But they'll never not be able to know which way north is. And they can always come back to the path if they have some calibrated device that allows them to do that. If you don't give them the calibrated device, then you end up with what we have in this country, which is the transgender movement and all these other people that are looking for a reason. They are looking for a center, and they're looking for a true north, and it's not true. And I know it's not true because there's 2,000 years of history showing what is and what is not true. There's a reason why the entire Western civilization exists. And it's all based on the fundamental Christian practices that we have, the value system that even like a wild secular Marxist might have. You know, you ask him, you're like, well, what do you believe in? Well, we should take care of all people and all people. He's like, well, why do you believe that there's dignity or worth in a person? It turns out it's because there's a Christian understanding that we're created in this image and likeness of God, and that we are given a certain amount of, a spark of the divinity, that we are actually valuable in a way that was never thought of until before Christ showed up. Like, nobody thought that the poor and the sick were of value. And that's a fundamental piece that is an American value. Whether or not they understand where it comes from is irrelevant. So anyway, keeping people's moral compass tuned and calibrated is one of the reasons why we have religion in general. It's to help people find their way when they're astray. And so many people don't have it these days.
Absolutely. And if you believe in nothing, you'll fall for anything, just like you're talking about. That's
Clearly.
how that applies. They'll just fill it with anything. And,
Right?
and
You can't guide yourself. It's useless.
And I had the same experience where I went back. I was prodigal son type 2, and I went back as well. And I'm thankful that my parents sent me to Catholic school and gave me a Catholic upbringing, because later on I found it again, and I refound it myself, genuinely. Same kind of thing. So you're brainwashing them for good. You're grooming them for good. You got to groom your kids for good and not groom them for bad.
That is your job. Your responsibility is to indoctrinate, is probably a more accurate word. You have to indoctrinate your children with the values that you know are true and good based on the years of experience that you have. And I have a lot more experience in the world than my 5-year-old, for however bright she thinks she is. And she's very bright. I'm giving her the tools that she's gonna emulate. She's gonna mouth them for a while. She will parrot the things that I say. And at some point she'll probably resist those things because she's gotten to the point where the hormones in her brain tell her, dad doesn't think, what could he possibly know? And then at some point she's going to realize, well, dad actually did know what he was talking about. And the reason is because he got that from grandpa, and grandpa got that from his father. And like all of our, all human beings have an oral history of a family and a written history that comes down, and ours is tied to the Catholic tradition. So, our history goes back a very, very long ways, and there's people that have been doing it for a very long time. And luckily she'll have that to tap into whenever she wants to. Like I said, if she ever walks away, and I hope she doesn't, but if she does, she's always got it. It's always a way to find her way back. There's a light there that will always be there. The Catholic Church it's always the same when you walk away from it. You can come back 20 years later and it'll be the same.
Absolutely. Now, before I have to let you go, because I know you gave me an hour and I think we're running out of time a little bit, but let me do the Latin word of the day. And I think this is going to have a lot to do with what we're talking about, actually. Check it out.
FATENZO.com.
It's time for the Latin word of the day.
Ooh, the Latin word of the day time is dun-dun-dun, Seraphin. Seraphinus. What is Seraphin? Check it out. You know what it is? It's a burning snake-like angel. Actually, plural. Burning snake-like angels. Seraph being the singular version of that. So from late Latin, Seraphin means fiery ones. From Hebrew, seraphim with the M at the end. And snake from Hebrew, seraph. Not really a name, but rather what might be considered a genus, not unlike the word Elohim, the genus God. But whether it actually denotes a specific kind of creature can't be determined with the sparse data we have. Plural form of seraph. Alternative spelling of seraphim. Angelic beings regarded in traditional Christian angelology as belonging to the highest order of the ninefold celestial hierarchy associated with light and purity in Christian, Islamic, and Jewish writings. The seraphim are celestial beings portrayed as having 2 or 3 pairs of wings and serving as guardians of God's throne. Dude, I think that there's a lot to a name. I talk about it a lot on here. There's like so much power in a name. God spoke some words and created the entire universe. And as human beings living on this plane, We use words, we use our imagination, we use our brain, and we create our realities. And so your name being Seraphin, and you're just talking about your family and the oral tradition and things like that. So I think it actually has a lot to do with what we're talking about anyway today. But
Well,
it's a great name. And you, did you live up to your name?
I aspire to. There's something interesting about the highest choir of angels, that they have the 3 pairs of wings, as it noted. Obviously, it's my name, so I spent some time reading about what it means. The first pair of wings are meant to cover the eyes so that they don't gaze on the celestial presence of God. That the second pair keeps, and the third pair covers their feet.
Say that one more time. I didn't hear the second part. Second part's what?
So there's 3 pairs of wings. The first pair covers their eyes so they don't gaze on God. The second pair keeps them aloft and floating, flying. And the third is to cover their feet. And so you often see the seraphim, the choir of angels depicted as a human body, but with a pair of wings that fold and overlap over the eyes like this, and then another pair that fold and overlap over the feet with a third pair outstretched. So in, out, in is kind of the way it looks. And it's hexagonal in presentation. It often looks very similar to like a Star of David in kind of the general shape. You see it in different iconography. So do I live up to the highest choir of angels? Probably not. I think that's an aspirational type of thing to try to be, because they are obviously the highest choir because they are the closest to God. That's the purpose of it. I've clearly not lived up to that plenty of times in my life. I'm very comfortable with that at this point. And yet it's an aspirational name in some ways, right? I have people constantly that tell me it means something to them. And so that may be something more important, whether or not I'm able to be the thing in my own life, whether the example that people get, because they don't know my whole life. They don't know all my iniquities and all my foibles and all the things, the way that my family and my wife does. But if it inspires other people to do things well, I've always told people, since this has been going on, and I didn't seek to be a public figure, it was sort of thrust upon me. I grew up in a family where my dad was in news media, right? He was an on-air personality from the time he was maybe 14 years old on. He always wanted to be a guy that spoke to people who heard his voice, and he's a very pious man in many ways. He's been able to destroy his temper. My parents had a separation for 8 years. It's almost like the 7 years of completion, right? But they had 8 years where they were apart when they were married, and they've been married for 42 years at this point. And of those 8 years, most guys go and they run off and they do, they get a Corvette and then they get a young girlfriend. Like, that's the midlife crisis. My dad's midlife crisis led him to go stay at a Benedictine monastery. And he spent like a year there, just walking around in sandals and wearing a robe and hanging out in the desert and in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in New Mexico. So that's funny to me that's the kind of guy that I come from. That's the kind of example that I grew up with. So I had the opportunity if I wanted. He grew up doing media. I could have been in media. I didn't want to be in media. I wanted to carry a gun and carry a shield and a badge and go out there and, stop things that were going wrong in the world. That was a profession of arms, was sort of what I thought my calling was. And yet, God always has a different plan for you. And we don't always know what that is until it's executed. So I've tried to remember that my job is just to be on the train, but I'm not the conductor and I didn't lay the tracks. And I'm just, along for this ride. So I'll try to be the best example that I could do. And if it helps other people, then that's kind of cool too. But moreover, I didn't choose to be part of this thing. If you had asked me 2 years ago, are you going to be sitting and doing podcasts first thing in the morning and talking to people, one, about Christianity or Catholicism? The answer would have been no. And then number two, are you going to be going on national media and talking about the malfeasance of your employer? And it's like, I don't think so. I could have never predicted any of these things. So that is kind of the funny piece of it. And I couldn't tell you why my name is the way it is, but it's been like that since I was born.
What are those books there?
These are books by my father. So one of them is called One Stupid Mistake, and the subtitle is Smart Decision Making in a Crazy World. I told him he missed an opportunity. It ought to be in a stupid world. These are his sort of congealed philosophies and a bunch of different sort of spiritual exercises, actually. It's a really easy book. I read it on a plane, and then I gave it to the lady I was sitting next to because she was fascinated with it. It's a series of self-reflective exercises on decisions that you've made and decisions that you will make, and how to figure out, how do you avoid the one stupid mistake? Because a lot of people, he gives all these examples of people who have had a very public downfall. And the downfall came from one poor decision. You could trace it back to one really, really bad decision, and it led to a cacophony of other bad decisions. So this is my dad's reflection on that in his 70s. He wrote that. And then the other one over here is called When Did You Stop Being You? In Search of Your Personal Brand. It's written by Charlie Seraphin. So that's my father, Charlie Seraphin.
Nice.
And that book is a discussion about his experience in marketing. He used to do marketing for Major League Baseball. He did marketing for radio stations for many years. He's helped people, craft their radio spots and their visual marketing and their TV spots and so on to be able to represent their brand. But it's an evaluation of how to find what your personal brand is. And I think most people, and I think this is the point of his book, most people are projecting what they believe other people want of them, what they think the most marketable version of themselves is. And interestingly enough, and in a very spiritual way, the thing that you have interpreted that the world wants of you is probably not the most marketable version of yourself. The most marketable version of yourself is the thing that reflects your true values because you live them every day. If you try to be one thing and act in another way, they won't work. And so your brand becomes disingenuous. And so it's an evaluation of how do you look in the mirror and see the same thing that other people see of you and then be the thing that people expect of you that reflects your actual inner values, as opposed to this is my Instagram life, this is my filter, this is the Facebook presentation that I have so people can be jealous of it and keeping up with the Joneses kind of thing. Like, is that really the way that you live every day? You'll be exhausted if you do that sort of thing. So it's a meditation again on how to find what that inner truth is and then let people see it, how to let people see what your inner version is and be the best thing of yourself.
Wow, I found that fascinating. My mom was a writer and she wrote a couple of different books, but they're all science fiction. But it sounds like when you talk about your life, your father's life, the fact that he went into a monastery at some point, was searching for that deep spiritual meaning in life. Like that Seraphin name has something to do with something, right? I mean, it just does. You don't even realize it, but your name has so much to do with your life. It's just weird. It's like George Carlin said about names or whatever. Why aren't they naming their kids? I don't know. They could have applied to that. But while I have you on here, is there any way that can I talk to you about January 6th, if I could? I know we're kind of tight on time, but yesterday Tucker had a little segment, not a little segment. I think most of the show on Tucker yesterday was all about J6 because McCarthy handed over a lot of that film footage to Tucker and his producers, and so he's been combing through it, and he released some video of Sicknick, the officer who died the next day, walking around, appearing normal, and also the guy, the shaman, the Q shaman guy, walking around. Nobody's really touching them. Here, I have some of the clips. I was wondering if you can maybe opine about this.
FATENZO.com.
The first thing you notice from viewing the full video record of January 6th is just how many people entered the Capitol building that day. Hundreds and hundreds of people, possibly thousands, over the course of about 2 hours. The crowd was enormous. A small percentage of them were hooligans. They committed vandalism. You've seen their pictures again and again. But the overwhelming majority weren't. They were peaceful, they were orderly and meek. These were not insurrectionists, they were sightseers. Footage from inside the Capitol overturns the story you've heard about January 6th. Protesters queue up in neat little lines. They give each other tours outside the Speaker's office. They take cheerful selfies and they smile. They're not destroying the Capitol, they obviously revere the Capitol. They're there because they believe the election was stolen from them. They believe in the system. Here's the man you've heard referred to as the QAnon shaman outside the Senate chamber. These are not rioters. These are people who wandered over from a political rally.
We will not let them silence your voices.
After the rally, they walked down Pennsylvania Avenue, where organizers had secured a federal permit to hold a legal rally on the grounds of the Capitol.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
Once at the Capitol building, things began to get chaotic. Capitol police officers fired tear gas into the crowd. A few at the front of the herd broke windows. Someone opened the doors, and many hundreds of others just walked in.
We're going to
Of course, they did make it the story. And at the center of it, the single most famous person arrested that day was a Navy veteran from Arizona called Jacob Chansley, often referred to as the QAnon shaman.
The so-called QAnon shaman.
QAnon shaman.
Someone named Q Shaman.
Jacob Chansley became the face of January 6th, a dangerous conspiracy theorist dressed in outlandish costume who led the violent insurrection to overthrow American democracy. For these crimes, Chansley was sentenced to nearly 4 years in prison, far more time than many violent criminals now receive. What did Jacob Chansley do to receive this punishment? To this day, there is dispute over how Chansley got into the Capitol building. But according to our review of the internal surveillance video, it is very clear what happened once he got inside. Virtually every moment of his time inside the Capitol was caught on tape. The tapes show that Capitol Police never stopped Jacob Chansley. They helped him. They acted as his tour guides. Here's video of Chansley in the Senate chamber. Capitol Police officers take him to multiple entrances and even try to open locked doors for him. We counted at least 9 officers who were within touching distance of unarmed Jacob Chansley. Not one of them even tried to slow him down. Chansley understood that Capitol Police were his allies. Video shows him giving thanks for them in a prayer on the floor of the Senate. Watch.
Thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving the inspiration needed to these police officers to allow us in this building.
Contrast the reality of what Jacob Chansley did in the Capitol building on January 6th, the indisputable facts recorded on video, some of which has never before been seen, with the depiction of Jacob Chansley that you've seen in the media for more than 2 years. He's a terrorist, they said. He should be killed.
Shoot him. Yeah. Shoot him. Like, you burst into the United States, if he was dressed like bin Laden, would you have shot him?
Shoot him. Shoot him. It makes you wonder, who are the violent extremists here? Not Jacob Chansley, and the video proves that. But you would never have known from the media coverage.
The people sitting in the chairs need to be sitting in a jail cell.
Chansley is in a jail cell. He's been there for months. If he was in fact committing such a grave crime, why didn't the officers who were standing right next to him place him under arrest? Until now, no one could even prove that even happened. But it did.
Outstanding. Pow!
Look at this. Do you think that a lot of these people that are on pretrial detainment, people that have already been given these egregious sentences, do you think they're just patsies for this J6 thing?
There's clearly a strong motivation to see them punished. There's really 3 soft seats for government prosecutions. They happen in the Eastern District of Virginia, they happen in the District of Washington, D.C., and they happen in the Southern District of New York. Those are the 3 places the government goes to crucify people with the legal system in a way that is very, very sympathetic and favorable to government prosecution. And these are all happening in the District of Washington, D.C. When you look at what the jury pool looks like in Washington, D.C., you have 90% of those people are registered Democrats. And of those people, I've spent a lot of time talking to folks who have been either reporting on it or people who are actually at J6 that have been on trial. There's a very bizarre thing that happens in the picking of the juries, even in this place. I don't know if you've ever seen or been on jury duty, but generally the goal of jury duty is to not get picked for a jury, right? Most people don't want to do that. They got a life, they got kids. It's an imposition. It's awkward. They've got to be doing strange things. And the really bizarre piece for me is that people in the January 6th juries are trying to get on. They are looking to be a part of this history so they could be part of the punishment phase of stopping these people for something that they clearly did not understand. It was really obvious to me. Like, I worked in DC, right? I worked there for 5 years in the Washington field office. I worked jogging distance from the National Mall many, many days for several of those years. And I would go jogging on the National Mall. So this place is not unfamiliar to me. I haven't been inside the Capitol building like that. But I worked with Capitol police officers on all kinds of different events. Every year on the State of the Union, the FBI gets involved and does sort of a, what do you call it? They call them investigative teams, where we're basically just mingling around the crowd to make sure people are not trying to do any violence or leave a backpack bomb or something like that. So we're out doing these things. I'm with Capitol Police. I've been working with Secret Service. I've done 2 different inaugurations for 2 different presidents. So I've spent a bunch of time in this security environment. And for whatever reason, there's this huge desire right now to enforce the media, I would call it hype or hysteria about January 6th. Like, I was also with cops who responded to January 6th on January 6th on the day. We were out shooting, we were out training, we were doing a professional development course where we were learning how to be more accurate with a red dot on a pistol. So we're doing that, and like guys from the Maryland State SWAT team and guys from the local different SWAT teams around PG County, which is one of the surrounding counties, and Frederick, Maryland, and some of the other areas that surround the Capitol. We're out. There was probably 25 of us that were training, and I think maybe like a third of the class got pulled to go do mutual aid response. And we were all laughing about what we saw because it was ridiculous on its face. You know, we saw this guy, the QAnon shaman, this guy Jacob. The dude is out dressed like a clown, like he's wearing face paint, like he could be at a football game, right? Like, that is not a serious person. As my buddy Stephen Friend, who's another FBI whistleblower, says, you know, there's not, as far as we know, like an invisible ink backside of the Constitution that says if you make it to the Speaker of the House or Senate's chair while wearing a Viking helmet, then you become the leader of the nation. Like, that's not in the invisible ink side of the Constitution, right? Like, that's not part of our Constitution. That's not how you overthrow our government. Nobody serious 50 years ago, nobody serious 5 years ago would have said that if you got a guy through the doors and he made it onto the floor of the House and he sat down and he was wearing a Viking helmet and an American flag, that he becomes the new king of America. That's not a thing that we would believe. That was a bunch of people, as he said, doing sightseeing. Doesn't mean that some people weren't violent. You punch a cop, I think you should probably, suffer whatever the consequences for it. But people punched cops all year long in 2020, and punch cops that I know, and were, stacking bricks to go and invade the White House. They moved the president into the bunker in the summer of 2020 in September or August. And my team was one of the teams that responded down there and stood shoulder to shoulder with Secret Service guys, making sure that the White House didn't get overrun as they set up more and more anti-scale fencing. So there was clearly a double standard of enforcement, and that's really the place where I come in. I don't know if they were patsies. I don't know if they were set up. I don't know if what entities within the government, if any, were involved in creating that picture that we saw of people breaking glass and doing things. But what I do know is there was a very biased, one-sided response to people who engaged in some maybe inappropriate activity, and that inappropriate activity was generally far less than what I saw, because I was also in Portland. My surveillance team went and did 2 weeks of undercover surveillance in Portland. So I saw what violence looked like on some of those things. I saw the aftermath, the destruction of the downtown of Portland. It looks, like everything's boarded up. They're all paying tribute to like basically an occupying army of BLM and Antifa types, spray paint all over everything. There were signs that were up there, like in the Apple store, saying like, we're not your enemy, and all this other kind of stuff, literally like kowtowing to the types of people that were involved in the violence. And then every person who was involved in January 6th must go. Washington field office for the FBI set up 3 squads with 30 plus FBI agents who do that full-time nonstop. And they're just getting rid of, I just found this out a couple days ago, they're getting rid of the seasoned field agents who have done work and kind of know what's right and wrong for a whole career. They're now bringing in 30 people from Quantico who are on probation and can be fired if they question the narrative. That's really, really, really scary stuff to me. Scary to me because I know what that looks like. I know that people that are on probation will do what they're told, because it takes a lot to get to the job in the FBI, and these people are going to go out and do it. So, the whole thing is sick. It's a symptom of a bigger disease that's going on in this country, which is a totally polarized electorate, a totally left versus right, division, a schism, if you will, that happened in this country. And half of the country looks at one thing and sees one, it's a Rorschach test, I guess. Well, however you view January 6th, however you view the BLM Antifa riots of 2020, that tells you how you're going to vote at this point. And I don't like that. That's not the way that we grew up in this country. We used to know that there was an evil, there was a bad guy. That bad guy was doing things that were antithetical to American values. And then all Americans sort of knew that America was a good place. The difference that we had was, how do we make it a better place? That was the disagreement fundamentally between the left and the right in the 80s, in the 90s, in the early 2000s even, we all sort of knew what the right answer was. It was like, how do we get there? Is it more taxes? Is it more government policies? Is it this? Is it that? Is it people need to go to church? Do people just need to find Jesus? Whatever the answer that you came up with is, kind of told you how you voted. That's not what we're dealing with today. Now, 50% of the country thinks the other 50% of the country are evil. And I think there's some evidence that may actually be the case based on what they're doing with the power that they have.
Don't you think it's humbling though for a lot of these right-wing people? I was very right-wing during the Trump thing. I was pretty much very extreme. I'm extreme in everything I do. Right now how I'm exploring the Catholic Church and becoming a deacon is very extreme in a certain subculture of people, right? And so I was doing the same kind of thing where I was like studying Trump supporters at that time, and a lot of Trump supporters were not very humble in looking at this George Floyd thing and realizing that people can get caught up in mob, like a kind of a mob mentality or whatever, on a spontaneous mob mentality when you're out there protesting, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think they got served some humble pie too by, getting dragged into that whole thing themselves.
Yeah, the difference is that rather than being shamed and saying this is inappropriate behavior and this is not the way that we act as Americans, they are getting the full force and the weight of the federal government and the U.S. judicial system on it, that's not the same experience. That's a very different experience. That's not humbling. That's terrifying. And I'm fine with people being humbled. I think it's part of our cycle on Earth that many of us will, have things like I had all the things that I really wanted and or needed, right? And then pretty dramatically humbled. You have to sell your house and do something very different and put everything you own in a storage unit and pay someone to just hold on to your things that you can't use. I have a very nice kitchen table, but I can't put my kids at it right now. That sort of thing. That's humbling, but it doesn't do any damage.
It's terrible.
It does sent to when you start getting sent into the DC prison system or the DC jail system, which is atrocious, having been on the other end of it and knowing what people go into there. One of my buddies got sent there for a DUI that was also wrong. He actually had a car accident, a head injury, and they treated him as though he was a drunk, even though there was no alcohol in his system. So they put him into the DC jail system. He's a white guy. He's also a Catholic. He teaches strength coaches physical fitness at a Catholic high school, and kind of looks like an Irish gangster. I love him because he's got like a rosary tattooed on one arm, and he's got like he's got the stained glass on the other arm, the crucifix, and so on. And looks like a hard dude. Used to be a fighter. Used to fight amateur, and he was the only guy in there for a non-violent offense. He was there for basically wrecking his own car and hurting nobody. And the guys around him, and like, were like, what are you in for? He was like, I don't know. And he's like, what are you in for? And they were like, oh, I stabbed a guy. He's like, what are you in for? Like, oh, I threw this dude out of a glass window, and he got cut and he went to the hospital. He might have died. Like, those are the kind of people that were in the DC jail system. And then there's my buddy who, like I said, wrecked a minivan on his way to go pick up his kids, of which he has 3 kids. So it's a very different kind of person. And the people that are from the January 6th, riot or got picked up for that and got thrown into these jails, it's a very, very different type of offense that they have compared to the people that are around them, which is why they are suffering. And I do think it's wrong, because what our federal government did was go full bore on something that gets other people out of, like, some people don't even go to jail for murder in DC. There's a guy that we arrested. I was part of an arrest team that pulled a guy off that was a convicted murderer, and he worked for the city of DC after he got out of jail, which was only like 9 years later. And we arrested him again because he was selling fentanyl, and the fentanyl killed somebody. So those are the kind of people that are working in the city buildings in DC. The corruption there is so intense and is almost unfathomable to people who have never experienced anything like it. I cannot tell you how disturbing it is to know that, grandmothers who went and took some flyers from the Capitol and, basically went on an unguided walking tour of the thing because the building doors were open. And that was known from the beginning. For those of us that were paying attention, it was always clear that there were some people that literally were let in by the cops, the Capitol Police, and had that experience. So there's no shock to me that Jacob, whatever his last name was like led around. Like, of course he was. Like, that video is not eye-opening to anybody that's been paying attention, unless you're part of that group that just wants to see people punished, that wants to see people crushed. And there's something really, really disgusting about that. In our country, we're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, which is actually probably a Christian position. It's not us to, we don't get to judge until we actually go through that process that is kind of hopefully guided by the hand of God.
Well, the Christian position is to settle with your brother before you even get in front of the judge.
That's correct. That's right. And that doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. Dude, this is it is terrifying what's happening right now with the January 6th people. It is terrifying. That guy, the Q shaman, he was getting led around by 2 police officers. They were escorting him. That was weird. That looks weird. That looks so weird that they brought him up there, and there was some CNN cameras just waiting to get, the perfect picture of him screaming. Right. That was crazy, right? I mean, I really do believe that they're like patsies.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like they're set up, and who. So the real question is who and why. What's the motivation? And I don't think that we have enough information to know that and stuff. So I like to not speculate on what we don't know. I like to look at evidence and just speak about. I just want to speak about the things that we see with our own eyes, right? Like we can make intelligent and discerning discussions on it without speculation, and then let the evidence be what it is. Unfortunately, the evidence has been hidden for, coming like just over 2 years at this point, which is also bizarre. Those tapes belong to the American people because the American people pay for them. That's my take on things. It's part of the reason why I've been exposing stuff in the FBI. Who funds the FBI other than us? So the FBI is supposed to work for us, all of us, and on behalf of us.
You're the man. Let me do the Fulton Sheen of the day really quick here. This is the
wisdom of Fulton Sheen.
With the energy of Charlie Sheen.
That's how I roll. I have 1 speed. I have 1 gear.
Doverlation.
You can never be commanded, for example, to like pickles.
Heart.
You know how base we are.
Outstanding.
I'm too smart. Too smart.
I love
trick my brain. That's happening.
All right. The wisdom of Fulton Sheen from March 7th. Love itself starts with the desire for something good. Love itself starts with the desire for something good. Okay, because God loves us, so he desired us to be good, but we're just total scum. So we, immediately break from him always. As soon as we had the chance in the Garden of Eden, we committed the sin. I mean, to think that 1/3 of all the angels, look at you, Seraphin, 1/3 of all the angels went against God. Could you believe that? I mean, I always thought that was crazy. Like, what is God, like an insufficient leader or something like that? He creates all these angels, and 1/3, the best angel that he has, Satan, that's the best looking, best equipped, best angel, decides to turn away from God and takes 1/3 of all the angels with him. Isn't that crazy? I find that just fascinating, honestly.
It's pride. And that's why pride is, the original sin is pride, right? I mean, it is the root of all these things. It's also interesting that that's the piece that the political left has decided is the most important feast day is, Pride Parade Day. I always found that to be an interesting lineup that, happy pride. Pride is not something that anybody should aspire to. In fact, pride is, it's sort of the downfall in all Western society. It's the root of many of the other sins. It's interesting.
Yeah. What do you think about the Proud Boys that are in the January 6th confinement right now?
Different animal. That's a joke. I don't know how much you know about the Proud Boys, but so many people in the FBI have no idea about it either. The Proud Boys were, even the name comes from a silly song that they were making fun of. Do you know that?
Yeah, no, I know a little bit about the Proud Boys, but I'm being humble right now.
That's fair. I just find it sad that people are going to take certain, and this is the danger when you take people making a joke and you make it serious, and then you take things that are serious and you make it a joke. We've done both of those things, and they're both wrong, because who are we to be involved in that? I do agree with that. That love is the beginning intention, though. I think that who know a lot of types of meditation, their job, and even when you go to mass, we set an intention for the mass, and if the intention is based in love for your day, for your action, for your celebration of the Eucharist, and so on, then you've reached a place where you're doing things in the way that we're intended to do them. Your intention is good, and the acts that flow out of that should probably be good. If your intention comes for, self-aggrandizement, or if it comes from pride, or if it comes from any of these other things, then the fruits of it will also be equally poisonous. So I like that. I like that little thought. It's short and it's easy, but it's deep enough that I think we can embrace that if your intention starts with love, then you're probably going to be on the right track.
Amen to that. And I think that Mass is like the highest form of meditation. I believe that prayer is just meditation. You don't even need to say anything. All you have to be quiet and know God. I just make the sign of the cross and then shut up. Don't say anything in your brain.
The highest form of meditation is when you bring 3 small children with you. Then it's just like actually daycare with a silence requirement. But don't they love traditional Latin Mass? Kids love it.
I think they love it way more than Novus Ordo.
It's certainly more engaging on so many more senses. My little kids have not seen it yet. That's not an option where we are. We're in a very small place, but I do think that might quiet down my otherwise like Cheerio chomping 2-year-old who simply just wants to look around and see what's happening. If there's more engagement, there's a lot of just quiet things that he can't fathom what's going on. He can't understand what's happening at the consecration.
Mr. Seraphin, I know I've taken a little longer than I planned previously, but can I just do the saint of the day and then we'll end this? I just have that one more thing to do. Let me do the saint of the day. Actually, there's 2 saints of the day. Saints Perpetua and Felicity. Felicity. Here's a little about them. This is from Franciscan Media. When my father, in his affection for me, was trying to turn me from my purpose by arguments and thus weaken my faith, I said to him, "Do you see this vessel, water pot, or whatever it may be? Can it be called by any other name than what it is?" "No," he replied. "So also I cannot call myself by any other name than what I am, a Christian." So writes Perpetua, a young, beautiful, well-educated, a noble woman of Carthage in North Africa, mother of an infant son and chronicler of the persecution of the Christians by Emperor Septimius Severus. Perpetua's mother was a Christian and her father a pagan. He continually pled with her to deny her faith. She refused and was imprisoned at age 22. Oh, one sec. In her diary, Perpetua describes her period of captivity. "What a day of horror, terrible heat, owing to the crowds, rough treatment by soldiers. To crown all, I was tormented with anxiety for my baby. Such anxieties I suffered for many days, but I obtained leave for my baby to remain in the prison with me, and being relieved of my trouble and anxiety for him, I at once recovered my health, and my prison became a palace to me, and I would rather have been there than anywhere else." Despite threats of persecution and death, Perpetua, Felicity, a slave woman, an expectant mother, and 3 companions, Revocatus, Secundulus, and Saturninus, refused to renounce their Christian faith. For their unwillingness, all were sent to the public games and the amphitheater. There, Perpetua and Felicity were beheaded, and the others killed by beasts. Felicity gave birth to a daughter a few days before the games commenced. Perpetua's record of her trial and imprisonment ends that day before the games. What was done in the games themselves, let him write who will. The diary was finished by an eyewitness, and the reflection of their veneration today is: persecution for religious beliefs is not confined to Christians in ancient times. Consider Anne Frank, the Jewish girl who, with her family, was forced into hiding and later died in Bergen-Belsen, one of Hitler's death camps during World War II. Anne, like Perpetua and Felicity, endured hardship and suffering and finally death because she committed herself to God. In her diary, Anne writes, "It's twice as hard for us young ones to hold our ground and maintain our opinions in a time when all ideals are being shattered and destroyed, when people are showing their worst side and do not know whether to believe in truth and right and God." And they are, by the way, the saints, the patron saints of widows and mothers of deceased sons. All right, so that's the saints of the day. I love talking about the saints, because it just makes you. There's a lot of things that you can tell by being shown sorry, you can learn by being shown, not told. I think that's the difference with Christianity, Catholicism, more specifically. But you know, in the Old Testament, it's all tell. The prophets are like, "Hey, do this, or something's gonna happen." Or God's like, "Hey, Noah, this whole place is gonna flood if these people don't start acting right." Right, and then they flood everything. But Christ came down to show people because we are slow learners, right? And the saints do that for me. When you go over the saints, you kind of like, okay, this is the right way to live. This person, did the right thing. It's kind of like what my guest host Kyle Seraphin is doing right now. He doesn't have to do what he's doing. It could be a lot easier for him and a lot more financially secure and stuff like that to raise a family than to be an FBI whistleblower. But he's doing it. And I think that there's some power in names. And he might be living up to that name of his. You know what I'm saying? Let me do, okay, we're almost done here. I got to do the prayer and the meditation really quick. That's it. Do the meditation of the day really fast. Meditation is by St. Augustine. He's called a doctor of the church and is one of the most important theologians in the history of the church. This is called Serving the One Teacher, Father, and Master. This day, coming round year after year, is a reminder to us and represents for us the day on which God's holy servants, Perpetua and Felicity, burst into bloom in perpetual felicity, holding on to the name of Christ in the war, and at the same time also finding their own names in the reward. If what I can offer is quite unequal to the merits of these saints, I can still contribute my own enthusiastic feelings to the joy of this great feast. What, after all, could be more glorious than these women, whom men can more easily admire than imitate? But this redounds supremely to the praise of him in whom they believed, and in whose name they ran the race together with faithful zeal. In heaven, the glorious martyrs will be resplendent with their special light, and distinguishes them, and the bodies in which they suffered unseemingly torments will be turned for them into seemly robes of honor. For then let us celebrate their feasts, as indeed we are doing, with the utmost devotion, soberly cheerful, gathered in a holy assembly, thinking faithful thoughts, confidently proclaiming their sanctity. It is no small part of imitation to rejoice together in the virtues of those who are better than we are. They are great, we are little, but the Lord has blessed the little with the great. They have gone ahead of us. They tower over us like giants. If we are not capable of following them in action, let us follow in affection. If not in glory, then certainly in joy and gladness. If not in merit, then in desire. If not in suffering, then in fellow feeling. If not in excellence, then in our close relationship with them. It should not seem a small part to us that we are members of the same person's body as they are too, even though we cannot compare with them. Because if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. So too, when one member is glorified, all the members rejoice with it. Glory be to the head, by which consideration is given to the hands above and to the feet below. Just as the one man laid down his life for us all, so the martyrs imitated him and laid down their lives for their brothers and sisters, and in order that this bumper crop of Christian peoples might spring up like sprouting seeds, they watered the earth with their blood. So we too are the fruit of their toil. We admire them. They are sorry for us. We congratulate them. They pray for us. They strewed their bodies like garments on the road when the colt carrying the Lord was led into Jerusalem. Let us at least cut branches from the trees, pluck hymns and praises from the Holy Scriptures, and offer them in a joint expression of rejoicing. We are all in attendance upon the same Lord, all following the same teacher, accompanying the same leader, joined to the same head, wending our way to the same Jerusalem, pursuing the same charity, and embracing the same unity. All right, I'm going to do the prayer, unless you have any thoughts on that, the saint thing or whatever we just learned. I thought that was,
no, I think there's
pertains a lot to what we were talking about and everything.
Yeah, we don't see martyrs in this age in the same way. So there's something to be said about reflecting on those that happened all the way until
in the last 100 years even. We rolled over when 2020 happened. And I'd like to see people at least accept white martyrdom. They don't have to be red martyrs per se. But a little suffering for the thing.
Also support people too who are being martyrs right now, like those give, send, goes and things like that. People that are locked away in the gulag, you can help them, and you could be a martyr too by contributing. I think a little bit, and also you could probably help our boy Kyle Seraphin too. Do you have some kind of link or something where you're raising funds to create your like Project Veritas style FBI whistleblowing conglomerate or what?
I have a give, send, go. It mostly goes through. It's a pass through. I'm going to end up having to pay taxes on it, which will be interesting. But we've been passing to whistleblowers whose names are not public, although one of them just became public because of a House Democrat leak. Garrett O'Boyle, who's a friend of mine. But we give, send, go / Kyle Seraphin. People can donate if they want, or they can add their prayer intentions, which are also, we read them. And some of them end up on my little podcast. And the money we've been mostly kind of trying to keep another family that's in a much, I think, worse spot because they weren't as prepared for it than my family is. So we've been helping them along, and anybody that comes to me that's in the FBI that is facing this sort of problem, whether it be legal requirements or housing, if they're suffering because of the doing the right thing, then they're benefiting from this little fund.
Nice. GiveSendGo.com / Kyle Seraphin. And we all know how to spell the name because we did that for the Latin word of the day. And that's cool. That's great that you do the intentions on your show as well. Let's finish with some intentions really quick. Finish strong with a prayer.
FATENZO.com. It's time for the Catholic prayer of the day.
Very professional, Patty. Good job on the soundbite.
And now for some completely fictional bullshit.
Stick to the credo, Patty. Stick to the credo.
Outstanding. Pow.
Okay. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for life. Thank you for love. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me podcast with Kyle Seraphin, FBI whistleblower, doing the Lord's work. Lord, just stay with him and give him strength he needs and the financial backing he needs to do good and make the government a better place. And Lord, I pray for all those people that are in power, all those godless swine, anybody who's, in those positions, please let them lead with character and righteousness and kill their egos. And I pray for everybody in God's green globe or a flat surface with firmament on top. I'm not particularly sure, nor do I care the shape of the earth. But all the inhabitants herein, I do pray for. Let them all accept your Son, Jesus Christ, in their hearts as their personal saviors. Become born again, as the Protestants like to say. Let's offer some intentions, shall we? Let's pray for the January 6ers, those people in the gulags. Lord, hear our prayer. Pray for Tucker Carlson, that he keeps on doing good and exposing the truth. Lord, hear our prayer. Let's pray for the traditional Latin Mass and that it may survive and flourish, actually, because why can't people know their history and know where Catholicism was and where it came from, right? And the beautiful expression of the Latin. And let us teach our children it and let them teach theirs. We pray, Lord, hear our prayer. That's pretty much it, right? Do you have any intentions, Kyle?
I would offer that I pray that people have courage to do what they know is right when it's difficult, that they make the simple choice for right and not the easy choice, which may be wrong.
Lord, hear our prayer. And I'll just be quiet for 2 seconds so you guys could offer prayers that are in the quiet of your hearts. Lord, hear our prayer. Lord, please hear these prayers that we're offering for the souls of the sick who are in desperate need of a physician. May they accept your Son, Jesus Christ, in their heart, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. The podcast is ended. You guys can go in peace, love and serve the Lord, and be outstanding
Pow.
to each other. All right. Let me,
Fat
Kyle, thank you so much, man. Can you tell everybody where to go to follow you and stuff like that? What should they do? Reach out to you on Twitter?
FATENZO.com.
Well, I think Kyle got disconnected at the end, maybe. Not sure, but he's at Kyle Seraphin on Twitter. You could check out his tweets. And remember to give, set, and go, please. And check out his dad's books. And keep an eye out for him on Jesse Waters' show, right? And please, you guys, can you do me a favor and like and subscribe and share? I'm not just on YouTube. I'm not just on Rumble. I'm on BitChute. I'm on all these other platforms. And you can always subscribe by hitting that bell, just like the Catholic bells that we ring. Just remember, when you hear that, subscribe, please. Appreciate you guys as always. Thank you so much. And vaya con Dios.
FATENZO.com, 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 FATENZO.com.
Outstanding.